All right. Hi, guys. Thanks for joining in today's podcast. This is a podcast from BinaryWorks. Here we talk about technology trends, new initiatives, and innovations for higher educations. And we are joined by our industry expert called Aaron Basko. He's a chief multiplier at Mac Insight Group, and he has worked with various higher ed organizations, specifically worked on financial aid and everything, and is here to join and give us insights of what's happening in the market, what new trends and everything. Aaron, thanks for joining in.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Aaron, I know you have led enrollment and financial strategies across multiple institutions. What originally drew you to this higher education and this enrollment management? Can you walk us through that, your career path?
Sure. Ironically, I had a really good admissions counselor who reached out to me. So there was a person who worked for the place where I attended my alma mater who reached out, came to visit me in my school, and basically recruited me to the institution. And so years later, when I had finished my degree and I was kind of going out and I needed some career advice, I actually went to him and said, what do you think? Do you have any advice? And he really encouraged me to try enrollment. And so I got involved in admissions and started my career really in that way.
Wow, interesting. And over the last decade, if you look around, there's not many things have changed, specifically how universities attract. What's your thought on that?
So the I think as we're looking at that, I mean, I stay really passionate about the industry because I feel like there is there's a key to human flourishing in education, right? We want people to do well. We want to better the lives of as many people as we can, and I think education is a key part of that. And so, as I look and even the work I'm doing now with Mac Insight Group, a lot of the time we talk about the best way to help people flourish through education is to make sure that the institutions that are providing that education are as healthy and as strong as possible. So that's really a lot of what I focus on doing, trying to help in that way.
Okay. So let's dive into our today's topic around AI at the kids. So, how do you think AI has changed the landscape of this AI, the enrollment, how universities are using it, in your opinion?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely an evolving process, right? So we started really working with chatbots, and then those chatbots have gotten more and more intelligent and able to do things. So instead of just texting back and forth with students, basically in that kind of conversation, then they were able to start reaching out to students, and you could get them to phone call a student, right? So that you get this amazing speed to lead as you're starting to do that. And now I think what we're seeing is it's going beyond that, and you're really getting into the use cases for analysis of, with your AI, that you're able to really look and see what your students are doing, the way that they're behaving, understanding how to do that. It was interesting. We were meeting with one of our partners the other day, and they're really deeply into the AI space. And a lot of what they're talking about is that it's now becoming like they're moving AI is moving into this sort of thinking level, right, where it's really becoming like a strategic advisor for you in the enrollment space, both as you're a counselor at the first level and you're trying to connect with students, it's advising you how to do that better. But then as you're an enrollment leader, it's also advising you by being able to pull out data in different ways than you've ever been able to do before, and to be able to think about, okay, what within my data is actually worth sharing as I go and talk to this group, or as I meet with my team and give them instructions, right? How can I get the most pertinent insights from what we're seeing and the changes that are being made week to week, to be able to enable my people to do what they need to do.
Okay. Again, you froze for a second, but yeah,
Okay.
I get it. So one thing is like earlier people used to search in Google, and now they are moving towards the first touch point is in the ChatGPT or Claude. They start the discovery point there. And what's your take on that? Is universities are apt to do the optimization towards to get listed out there, or you think it will be very organic? They will
I,
automatically. Yeah.
I mean, I do think institutions are going to need to change how they, position themselves with students, right? Because it is. I mean, now I think it's very common for students to start going to the market and saying, give me a list of all the schools in the western half of the United States that have this major, and rank them by my cost or something like that, right? I mean, you're seeing students utilize that instead of more traditional ways of searching, and so you need to be able to be thinking like a student and the questions that they are going to ask if you want to be able to be on that list of places that they're exploring. And that's a whole new way of doing it, right? That's the sort of passive side of it, is that we need to be prepared and we need to be optimized to be able to work with the AI tools so that we're actually getting in front of students in good ways. And then we need to be active on the other side and utilizing the AI to be able to identify which students that our contact and our outreach makes a difference, to make sure that we're getting in front of them. So
Correct.
it's kind of a two-way street, right?
Yeah, I understand. Do you think is the enrollment team is already using any tools like that to get listed out there, or anything enrollment teams are using it now, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to change the role of the sort of average admissions person, enrollment person, right? I think, on the one hand, it's going to change the way we communicate with students, right? We're going to be using AI to rewrite a lot of our communications flow and to make it more responsive as we see students taking certain steps or interacting with us in certain ways. Those pieces are going to be really important. But I think it's also going to start informing the way that we have conversations with students. Again, we were talking to this partner we work with about how it can help you really know whether now is the right moment to call and talk to that student or outreach that student, whether you've built the relationship that you need to in order to make that happen. So I think it's going to really adjust the way that we interact. The personal is going to be super important, but it's going to be personal that is AI informed. And so that it's going to make every interaction, or most interactions, hopefully more effective by having that kind of analysis, by having sort of this kind of advisor sitting on your shoulder saying, hey, the data tells us to do this, or what we're seeing is this is the way that you need to reach out and make that kind of key contact.
Interesting. And is enrollment team is in any way using any automations now, you think, or how does that, any tools that you think they should try this immediately to get a big benefit or immediate productivity boost, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, we have. I think enrollment areas have been trying to figure out some automation over the last few years, and trying to realize how can we possibly reach especially in certain enrollment pools you have thousands of students, right? So how do you interact with those students? How do you figure out which ones are worth really connecting with at a deeper level? Which ones do you want to just kind of interact with at a light level? So I think we've been trying to do that, but I think AI will help us really take that next step in terms of automation, right? I think we always struggle, I kind of mentioned before, with speed to lead, right? It's really difficult for us to follow up in real time or close to the time of inquiry for a student with what they need. By the time we get back to students, sometimes we never get back to students, but when we do, oftentimes it's delayed, right? And I think right now, students are expecting really quick responses. And so I think the AI steps in and is able to provide that, right? I mean, I've seen tools again where it's like you're working your way through the institutional website, and the AI is collecting where you're going and kind of pulling it together for you as like, oh, it looks like this is what you're probably interested in. Would you be interested in this as well? It's sort of, really curating that information for you. And then, it'll ask you something like, would you like us to give you a call right at that moment, right? And then the AI actually makes the call, and the student interacts with that to get that sort of first quick speed to lead interaction, sort of immediate response that the student is looking for.
So is that kind of the customer supporters, or not like the students enrollment support? Is there any part of enrollment got automated or got real benefit with this AI, in your opinion? Is there, like, is it financial aid automation, or the students support? what part of enrollment got pretty much automated with AI?
Well, I think all of those pieces are in the process of probably being automated, right? I think that we were just talking about the customer service piece, but I
Yeah.
think as we look at it's going to have huge impacts on the modeling area, right? On our predictive ability with students, on helping to decide, again, which students are most likely to enroll, what they need in order to enroll. It's already challenging some of our assumptions, right? I think we have for years had certain assumptions based on the modeling ability that we had that said, okay, this is what, makes a student decide. This kind of interaction, is the highest predictor. And now we're seeing that, with a little more sophistication, you're able to look behind some of those impacts and say, well, maybe that's not the driver. Maybe that is just like maybe that's just what we see, right? Maybe that's just the influence, but maybe that's the outcome and not the not the initiative. So I think it's helping on the assessment part of things. It's helping us to track things quicker. So you can see week to week what trends are happening, which is, I mean, often a really difficult part for enrollment offices, right? They, especially as they get closer to their decision making time for students, those last 6 weeks are critical. But being able to get the analysis and the data that you need in order to make any kind of quick adjustments is really difficult, and the AI can certainly help with that. It speeds up that processing time, that analysis time, helps to help you just to make decisions much quicker in terms of what you're doing, and it's going to help us significantly on the financial aid side as well, just in terms of efficiency of packaging. When we can engage with students, being able to predict what they need and helping them to
Mhm.
self-serve in some ways that we've never been able to do.
Interesting. And do you think the students now are looking for online courses more than the physical coming to college, the traditional style? Do you think that is also impacting enrollment, or is that the colleges should adapt to this new requirement and move towards more online education? What's
I,
your opinion on that?
I mean, the trend is in that direction. It's not like immediate. I think there is still a strong base of people who want to go and have that experience of, living on the campus or close to the campus, of interacting in person. I think we have struggled to get the online experience, I think, to equal the in-person experience. I think that, there's a lot of data on that, right? That we're probably still not delivering it as well as we could. So I think institutions have to, I think, have that availability, right? They have to engage in that. You're seeing most of the graduate space move there very quickly, right? That's really a preferred method in much of the graduate space. You're seeing the undergraduate move there a little more slowly, but definitely in that direction. But I think we have a quality gap there many times, and so looking for tools that will help us to improve that quality, to improve the student experience, will make that possible. But I do think that institutions, almost all of them, need to have an option of that in their repertoire, right? They need to have some availability if they want to access a certain market of students, because there's a growing market of students that only want to access their education in that way.
Yes. And in your opinion, like uh, how is like for example, the financial aid, is that something that can also be made some kind of any automation, or providing like a 24 bar 7 kind of a financial aid counselor? Is that a possibility in future, or it should be done in person, or
No, I,
something?
I
Yeah.
see a lot of use cases for AI in the financial aid space, right? I think financial aid is always, it's sensitive because there are a lot of regulations and it has to be done right. And, the institutions are accountable for doing it right and to the federal government. And so, I think those areas probably are adapting AI more slowly because they're more cautious. Right. So they're looking to say, okay, how do we make sure that this is working? But I think, automating packaging has been something that area has been struggling with for years, right? The
Mhm.
tools are there to do some automation of packaging, but in most systems that I have seen, it's very clunky, right? It still requires a huge amount of upfront effort from financial aid professionals to set it all up correctly first. And then even when you do automation, it's
Mm.
often not fully automated, right? Like there is some auto packaging, but people still have to download certain things. They still have to push certain buttons. And, there's a lot of room for improvement in that area. And I think what AI does for that particular area is allows us to, again, it's going to need some training. It's going to need people to watch it and make sure that it's doing it correctly. But it has the potential to really speed up the automation, to do quality control checking for us to make sure our packaging is done correctly. And I think it has a huge opportunity when it comes to helping students self-serve or navigate the
Yeah.
journey, because I
Mm.
feel like so many students just get lost in the financial aid
Mm.
process, right? And there's just
Yeah.
not enough time in the day for financial aid counselors to call everybody and reach out and see, why is this student stuck in the process? Why haven't they taken the next step? Where I feel like the AI is going to allow students to really get kind of an advocate in the process, right? I see like the AI as this thing that kind of walks in front of you and kind of helps you open the door and then helps you talk to this person and more intelligently, right? And so really being that kind of a liaison for the
Mm.
student and the family as they're trying to navigate the process, and continually reminding them, like, okay, why are you stuck here? Is there something that's holding you up? Is there something we can do differently? And it might be that it can solve the problem, or it might be that it can flag the problem and send it to the real person, or indicate to the family that it's time to talk to a real person. But I think it
Yeah.
can significantly help out in that self-service area with people's understanding of financial aid and helping them to get kind of unstuck in the process so that they can smoothly, kind of flow through the funnel.
Mhm. Do you think is there any tool that is currently doing that kind of role better, or you guys are looking for some tool like this kind of self-service liaison, anything like that?
Yeah, we're actively looking at that right now at Mac Insight Group and the work that we're doing. I think we do a lot of work in the financial aid space. Not only that, but that's a lot of what we do. And I think, we are seeing there are opportunities because of the increased predictability with AI, that we're looking for ways to kind of push that process much earlier for families, right? So maybe even before the admissions process, because currently, right now, usually you're not engaging much with families before they're actually admitted, which is pretty far down the funnel, right? And so we're looking for opportunities where if you can predict some of what's likely to happen in terms of the student's admission or what they're likely to need, you can start engaging with those families much earlier and, pre-packaging them, helping them to know what it's going to look like if they are admitted, reaching out to them with tools and telling them, helping them to kind of guide them through the timeline and the process. So yeah, that's something we're actively working with right now, and I think probably there are institutions out there that are experimenting with it. It hasn't really gotten to the level where it's kind of industry wide. There's a lot of discussion about it still. I think it's still in its early stages, but we see huge opportunities to help families there, to help them help themselves. And again, that's an area where there have been critical shortages of staff in financial aid, right? And trained staff and people who really can manage the regulations and those kinds of things. So utilizing tools that help them deal with the volume is going to be, I think, an incredible benefit.
Uh, is there any bottleneck you see these regulations act as a bottleneck so that there are not many tools as you expect? Is there any bottlenecks? Yeah, do you
I mean,
see
I
that?
think there are concerns, current concerns about that. I mean, obviously, your compliance level is much higher in the area of financial aid than it is in, admissions and the other parts of enrollment management. So I think there you have to be more careful. But I also think that part of it is just a dynamic of, the admissions areas are always pushing, right? They always want the newest and latest thing. They're looking for new opportunities. They want to get a competitive advantage over other admissions offices, right? Where I
Mm.
think your financial aid offices aren't, they don't have that same competitive dynamic, right? They are more a service area for students. And so there's not as much push. They don't tend to be early adopters. They tend to, go more slowly and more cautiously in that. But I think, as they are able to see that, there are tools that could potentially help them do that. I think they're going to be interested in adopting those kinds of things. I think right now I think people just haven't quite seen exactly what it could look like and how it could work, and so that area is a little bit more cautious. But I think you're going to see that. I mean, all of the companies that work with in that financial aid space are going to come face to face with financial aid. And I
Mhm.
think too, the more that you see that financial aid is really a helpful driver of enrollment, the more likely you are to adopt and engage with AI. I think there's some institutions that still see like, well, enrollment and recruitment is over here, and financial aid is over here, and they just help students with this packaging piece, but it's really a service thing. They're not seeing themselves as tied together with enrollment. But at those institutions, where they're like, this really matters and we work together, they're more likely to be early adopters.
So the other important aspect is also on the student retention, because if a student leaves again, that is also going to impact the financial. If they have got the financial aid, it's again a risk factor. So is there any predictive system that is already in place with universities to identify, hey, this student is going to have an early exit or something like that, to avoid the financial risk, anything like that?
Yeah, this is an area that actually has been, I think, a little more ahead. There have been some tools in this space that
Mhm.
are, that are students are assigned to it. They kind of work through. They maybe opt in, but that are constantly sort of monitoring student behavior. And when they see certain types of behavior, or they act as that kind of chatbot companion that go out and say, "Oh, how's this going? How's this going?" And based on what the student's feedback is, they adjust, they make suggestions, they notify people. So there are some tools in this space that have been doing this for a little while, and I think we'll see those continue to improve. I think it's a huge need, right? Because we still, I feel, as an industry, are generally underperforming in the student retention area. We still are, losing a lot of students from some of the bumps and bruises that they get from things. And I think, I mean, I've worked a lot in the retention space, and you need to find ways to get students really connected with the university. And what I hope is that, on the one hand, the AI can help break some of those barriers down, right? It can say, okay, I can facilitate this interaction, or I can tell you need to go and connect with this office. But a lot of times, then the students run into other barriers or things that are not as friendly as they connect in. So what I really hope that it can continue to do is to drive students towards the right interactions with people on campus, because I feel like that building that relationship is critically important. And we're going to see if students are able to build that kind of sticking relationship with the AI itself as it moves forward. We'll find out, right? But
Yeah.
in the short term, I think it can definitely work on connecting students better with the right people on campus to give them a better experience. It can knock down some of those common pitfalls, make suggestions to students on what they could be doing, notify us of who is likely to have retention issues, and again, hopefully make those connections and say, like, look, you need to, students who have the experience you're having right now don't typically persist. And I think maybe we need to be honest with students in that and say, here are some steps you could take to make it more likely that you would persist.
Okay. So, is there any specific tool that you or some of the major universities are using to make this more retention? Like, I know it is more like a chatbot that predicts these things. Is there any tools that you guys
Yeah,
are using or looking
yeah,
to use? Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, I've worked with a few different, companies that are doing these kinds of things. I'd worked with ed sites in the past, and
Okay.
I've thought a little bit about like whether or not there's more that we could do to develop something like that in that space. I mean, like I said, I've worked a lot in retention areas. I've worked a lot in working across departments to try to get departments working together better, between academic advising and the financial aid areas. There's usually a big barrier there in terms of how those areas work together for student success. So I think there's a lot of room for new tool development in there. I've seen a few models of how it works, but I think it could be a lot better.
Okay. So, what percentage of students generally are exiting before the course completion? Like an
Yeah, I
average?
mean, if you look nationally, right? I mean, we are not hitting. We're a little bit over 50% usually in terms of students who do, get a degree in 4 years, an undergraduate degree, right? So, it. I don't think that's very good. There
Yeah,
certainly are institutions that are doing great work, but I think as an industry, if you're only really serving about half of your customers well,
yeah,
that's not great as an industry, right? You only have 50 or 60% happy customers. So what a huge opportunity, right? And in
yeah.
this day and age, or in this moment when there are less students, there's more competition for students. That's a huge opportunity, right? If part of your, instead of having to recruit 40% more students, you just keep more of the ones that you have. That is a huge ROI for institutions.
Is any of the tools that you have used as it reduced that 50% or something that you have seen to 40%, the exits, anything? Is there any early signs? I know it is these tools just came out few years back, I think. Is there any early signs that shows it is showing some improvement in this area? Anything like that?
Yeah, I do think there are some, examples of being able to move the needle. It's not usually like a 10% move. It's usually like a 2 or 3% move. And I think
2%.
the
No,
biggest
that is
challenge is that there's so many factors that it's like really it's hard to see, like, is it the tool that's making the difference? Is it the increased emphasis? Is it because the institution is improving its processes? So it can be really hard to measure the ROI on that. I mean, at the end of the day, if it works, great. If you're seeing the improvements that you want, maybe utilizing all of them is helpful. But I think being able to, I think that that's the hard part on decision making for retention is there are however many factors that could go into a student's decision to leave, and we have not done as much of the modeling on that we could. There are some companies that have done that take a look at you know. 10 years of your student data, and they look and they say what are the indicators that students are going to retain, what are the things that are in their way, and they've been doing that for maybe a decade or so. That is out there. But I think the tools as we move forward are going to get more sophisticated. They're going to be able to do some of the outreach for us. They are they're going to challenge some of our assumptions based on the data.
Mhm. So let's talk about the student experience also on campus. So do you think in future there will be any personalized AI tools that is going to be developed for each universities that is going to engage a student, talk about, hey, these are the classes you have, these are the things you have to do, something like that? Is something going to help in the student experience and engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fascinating thing with AI, like I was saying kind of earlier, I feel like it's going to become that kind of companion for people, right? It's going to
Yeah.
become both on the administrative side, right? I mean, one of the use cases that our partner was talking about is like as an enrollment manager, right? You can ask the AI like, okay, I have a board meeting in 3 hours. Based on what you're currently seeing in our data, what should I be sharing, right? I mean, what an amazing tool that is, right? For someone in the situations that I've been in, right, to be able to quickly pull that latest data and be able to present it to the right audience in the right way. So it becomes that sort of companion that like helps you get those insights quickly, gives you advice on how to present them. And I think it's going to do the same for students. I think again, like I was saying, you're going to end up with students who have a more curated journey, right? They're
Mhm.
starting to ask that AI instead of asking their friends like, okay, how do I sign up for housing, right? Or how do I, register for my classes on time? Or do you have any suggestions on this, right? Instead of asking each other, which is a bad source of information typically, or asking, waiting to ask the right person and their advisor and that kind of thing, which oftentimes it's hard to get the time, they're going to be able to ask their sort of AI companion okay, how do I navigate this? Like, help me do this, that kind of thing. It'll be interesting because, I mean, that does create this sense of dependency, right? Where you are, where students are dependent on, something else to help them navigate things. But, it's just a different tool, right? I mean, up until this point, people would use Google that way, right? And they would go out and just say, how do I do this, right? Or, hey Siri, how do I do this, right? So it's just it's the next real iteration of that. But I see it as something that's going to accompany students on their journey, and they're going to be easily able to say, I'm stuck here. I don't know how to pay my bill. Who do I need to talk to on campus? Right? They're going to help them do that. I mean, the last institution that I was at, they were just experimenting with, a chatbot function that goes beyond the straight website, the external website, and allows them to log into it and analyze their own record, right? And say, based on what you see in my record, what do I need to take for classes, right? Or
Yeah.
based on my current financial data, what would you recommend that I try to do that? So you're already seeing it kind of do those kinds of things, right? Where it's becoming your counselor, your source of information to help you get that taken care of.
That's good. So also on the smaller colleges, like will these kind of tools be in any way of competing, the small universities competing with large universities, providing the same kind of experience and making the students more engaged? Do you think this could be an opportunity for smaller colleges?
Yeah, I have thought about that. I mean, I think if it's done right, it could be an equalizer, right? It could be something that levels the playing field a little bit, because right now the playing field is very unbalanced. I feel like it's more unbalanced now than it has been in my career, right? Where you're seeing, big institutions with a lot of advantages and smaller institutions with a lot of disadvantages. And I think, there's a potential that if they are nimble enough, that institutions could use the technology to really shift things back a little bit in their direction, right? To be able to provide that highly personalized experience, to be able to, guide things through that, to be able to help students, have stronger service, more availability, those kinds of things. So as I talk with institutions, and they ask me like, what should we be thinking about AI? I said, I'm saying, I think it's a great opportunity. I think it's an opportunity that you need to really build specifically to your institution, right? It's not going to be a one size fits all kind of thing. You're going to want to develop it in a way that works. But I do feel like there are opportunities that if smaller institutions can embrace this, right, they could utilize it to their advantage to find the students they need, get more visibility, and provide a higher level experience that could help with retention as well.
Interesting. So let's talk about the international students for a bit. Like, I know you have a great experience in working in international kind of representation, all these things. So, is there an impact on the international student recruitment? Is AI making any significant help? What's your take on that?
International is an area of passion for me, right? It's an obvious interest, and I think right now we're missing a huge opportunity in international. I think right now people are, they're nervous. They've seen some dips in international
Well,
enrollment. They're concerned about the regulatory environment, and because of that, they they've just totally backed away, right? And really, I don't think that's the right approach. I think what you do in those opportunities is you question the way you're doing it and say, does this way still fit in the new environment, right? So, for example, people are more worried about students getting their visas, right, to be able to come to the U.S. I'm working on a project with a couple of institutions where we are looking at offering online dual enrollment to high school students internationally, right? Not many
wow.
people are doing that. That is a huge market. I mean, can you
Yeah.
imagine, right? Like that is thousands and thousands and thousands of students, and institutions are not tapping into that, but they could be, right? I'm actively working on that process right now, and I think it's just a great way for institutions. If they think differently, they can fill their spaces, they can recruit those students, and they can work around current circumstances. I think what the AI allows you to do is to really get to know those markets, choose your markets intelligently. It allows you to speak to those markets better, really to sort of translate what you're trying to say into more of the local, vernacular of the language, right? So that
Mhm.
you're making sense as you're talking to those places. But I think there's a huge opportunity. And right now, where the market is so tight domestically, and there are, students are applying to many of the same schools, institutions need new sources of students. And those students are
Mhm.
absolutely out there. They just are, not going to come to us in the way that they have previously. We're also seeing opportunities to work with international organizations, right? I was talking to a connection that I have that's really networked with hospitals in a particular country, right?
Mhm.
Well, those hospitals, they don't want to send students over for 4 years of a bachelor's degree. They want to do a 1 year certificate program that helps their employees upskill. That's a
Uh,
wonderful opportunity. It just requires that we think a little differently.
Interesting. Do you think universities are making like any promotions or advertisement to these international markets, or is it they're doing it through these uh, institutions like hospitals? That's how they are connecting with them to recruit these students or get these students.
I think it's a mixture. I think they are promoting, right? I think the hard thing about sort of traditional promotion, right? I mean, and again, maybe that's a way that the AI could help us, right? Is to fine tune our messaging and try to get it into the right markets and the right like micro markets, so that you're not advertising to everyone and people who really can't do this, and be able to predict based on historically where you've had students where it would matter to continue to promote. But I do think right now, still a lot of that is in connections, right? So a lot of that is finding a connection that can go between, right? I mean, that's a lot of the work that I've been doing in the international space is just that. I work with institutions. They tell me like, we would love to have this. Can you help us make connections? Find people who are interested in doing that. Find sources of students that we could partner with, right? Institutions that would help us partner, and that I think that works really great because there's a need on both sides, and I'm helping to facilitate those needs being met. So everybody wins. The students win, the organization in the other country wins, and the institution here wins. So
Is there any trend you see that uh, universities are not taking advantage of anything like that?
yeah, I mean, I do. That's one of the really interesting things of this moment, right? Is because they're a little nervous. Again, this happens with everything, right? You get a little bit nervous about something and you throw the whole thing out, right? Instead of saying, "Oh, okay, it sounds like we might need to adjust our tactics a little bit," right?
Yeah.
So I think many institutions right now are backing away from international students and just saying, "Oh, maybe it's more work. Maybe the old methods aren't going to work." When they could be. I mean, that market is enormous, right? I mean, compared to the US market, it's probably 10 times what the US market is. But it's a matter of being able to position yourself correctly and to be able to deliver the service that is going to make sense to those markets. So I think they are missing an opportunity. I think too many institutions have became dependent on one or two countries, and when things change in those one or two countries, they assume, okay, international doesn't work anymore, instead of saying, "Oh, maybe we need to switch our focus and focus on other countries." I've been doing great work in Latin America right now, right? That's a
Mm.
market that's actually been doing very well, and institutions, for the most part, aren't taking much advantage of it.
Mm. All right. So again, one the next thing is around the AI related things around on the leadership side, because our podcast is followed by many university leaders. So if the university leaders have to think about what could be the AI investment they should make, what aspects or what areas you think they should put their money on immediately to make it at least an AI investments from their organization.
Yeah. I think that it's a really hard thing as a leader, right? Because I think oftentimes when you're the leader, you feel like you should know everything. right? You feel like you should know what's out there. You feel like you
Yeah.
should already know what the solution is. And people are probably asking you, like, what are you doing with AI in your area, right? And you're like, I don't know. Like, I don't even know what's out there. So I feel like, for a lot of leaders in higher education, the first step is really becoming more aware of what's out there. And I think there's no shame in saying, like, I need to learn, what the new things are. I think for a lot of institutions, the best thing that they can do is find a partner that they trust who's working in this space, because you don't want to just buy a random solution, right? And you're not sure if it works for your institution or not. What you want to do is find a way to build something that is specific to you, that really matters with your institution, with what the messages you're trying to send, right? How can you take advantage of the AI? So I think oftentimes finding a partner, finding somebody you can work with that maybe knows it better than you do, and can come up with a solution that's a fit for you. Are there obvious things you can do? Yes, right. Like you can make sure you have a great chatbot, right? You can look for one of the more advanced ones that will reach out to your students in, speed to lead type of ways. Those are all obvious things that you could do, right? But like I said, we work with one particular partner that's helping institutions really get into that thinking space of using the AI really as a strategic advisor. And I think if you're looking at that from a predictive modeling area, then you need one kind of tool and how that can work. If you're looking at saying, hey, I'd really like to work with my financial aid office and make it much more efficient, and save a lot of those hours that we're using not very well, that's maybe a different kind of solution. So I think getting familiar with what's out there in the market is a good first step. I think finding somebody that you trust can work with and can guide you in that. You don't have to be the expert in everything, right? Sometimes it makes sense to cooperate, with somebody to be able to do that. So I think those can be helpful. But I do think, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for leaders in the enrollment space or in other spaces as well to think about how can the AI help us find where the leaks are in the boat, right? I think that's
Okay.
a lot of the time what it does for you, right? Is you're able to say, where are we dropping the ball? And not be
Mhm.
afraid of that, but say, okay, we know everybody's dropping the ball somewhere, right? Everybody could be improving in their process. Nobody's got a perfect process. So how can the AI help us to, number one, identify where those leaks are? And then number two, how could it help us close the gap? So, right. So if our leak is that we get plenty of prospects, but we're not able to follow up on them quickly enough. Well, AI can help with that, right? Or if it's sorting through and saying we don't know which ones to reach out to or what kind of conversation to have, the AI can help with that, right? Or if we don't have enough visibility to be able to say, in the past this has worked, how can we focus on those markets or those strategic steps that give us better results? The AI can help with that. So I think really thinking of it as a way to find the leaks in your boat, and then figure out how it can kind of help you close those gaps. So a lot of it is questioning, asking, can it do this? Can it do that? Right? And knowing who to go to that can give you those answers is a big deal.
Yes. So the other negative side of this AI is also it should not hallucinate, because the student is trying to ask a decision or something. They're trying to make a decision from the responses. The hallucination always plays a big role in AI. So how does universities, you think, in your opinion, they should think about this AI governance and these kind of hallucination issues? Uh, what's your take on that? Is there a team should be
Yeah.
there, or how does that should work?
I mean, I think that's something that it's easy to forget, right? That problem exists, and you just get used to relying on it. You think, oh, okay, it must be great because most of the time it works, and so it must work all the time. So I think you just probably have to keep reminding people that that is a possibility, right? It's not foolproof. It's it does have some failures and some limitations and drawbacks. So I think reminding people of that, and always putting in some human checks and balances are really important. I mean, I think again, this is why if you're to move ahead with AI and financial aid, right, that's an area where it's critical that you have still some human checks to that, right? So you can have the AI do the heavy lifting, but you still better have somebody who's quality controlling it to make sure that like it's done it correctly, because the your precision is so important, right? Where I think in other areas, maybe that precision isn't that big of a deal, right? If you're utilizing the AI to say, tell me which students I should reach out and call today that are most ready for a call, right? If it gives you a couple of wrong students,
Mhm.
like, okay, you called them extra, right? It's not a big deal. So I think, part of it with hallucinations is really saying, how big is the downside if it's a hallucination, right? If the
Yeah.
downside is like that example of calling, you're like, okay, it doesn't matter then. So once in a while it's wrong. That's fine, no problem. But if it's once in a while it's wrong and that reports something incorrectly to the federal government, then that's a problem, right?
Yeah.
So I think you're always doing that kind of risk reward thing, and where the areas are that there's low risk, then great, hands off, let it loose, let it roll, right? And in
Mhm.
those areas where a little bit of, where the risk is larger, then you need to say, okay, 10% of the time it's going to be wrong, right? Or whatever. And we need to be on the lookout to be able to find that 10%. So I think you need to do that risk reward analysis on, everywhere that you're using it.
Interesting. And the other aspects of AI is always there's a fear of it's going to impact the jobs. Do you think bringing AI is also going to have an impact on the enrollment, or will that create a fear among enrollment organizations? What's your take on that?
I think it will shift jobs. I don't think it will like eliminate as a quantity. Maybe it will, but what I'm seeing more is that it's likely to change what we do, right? So I was thinking the other day about like comparing it to, and again I'm going to show my age, but comparing it to like when email first appeared, right? Like that
Yeah.
was a massive transition in the marketplace, right? But we all thought, wow, okay, I'm going to have so much less work to do, right? Like now this is going to take all that work away and I'm going to have all this extra time. And of course now we just have lots and lots of email, right? So that doesn't happen sometimes the way you think it's going to. So but when you see a transition like that, it makes shifts, right? So maybe after that point, maybe people didn't have as many secretaries because they didn't need people to take dictation and write letters and do those kinds of things, right? Your mailing budget went down or whatever. But so you're seeing shifts, but it created jobs in other areas, right? It created different types of things because the technology made it possible for people to do new things, right? With maybe less training or less specification. So I think we're going to see the same thing, right? Like if you look at an area like career services, right, which is a place that's near and dear to my heart. I've done a lot of work there.
Mhm.
You're going to need less people to do resume reviews, right? Because the AI can do a lot of that for you, and it'll write the resume for you. In many cases, just as good, right? Or pretty close. So you're going to need less people to do that, but you're going to need more people to help teach students like those soft skills, like how do you network well, right? And how do
Mhm.
you, think strategically about your career moves over the long term and things like that. So I think it, I think it'll shift what you need. It'll give you some more demand for some of those higher level skills that people will have to have and push some of that up the chain, and those intensely relational skills. I think what it's going to do in a lot of ways is it's going to make the interactions that you do have, the human interactions, much more important, and they will need to be much higher quality. But it'll replace some of those lower end kind of interactions probably.
Trust. And so, what do you think in next 3 to 5 years, the with the new changes of the AI, how the enrollment and universities will look like? Will there be more human, as you said, more work, or will there be less human effort needed, or what's your take on that?
I think we're going to see some pretty dramatic changes. I think in a lot of ways, higher ed and this part of higher ed has been waiting for something to change for them to get unstuck. Because I really felt like for a while we have been stuck in old models of the way that we do things, the way that we look at our finances, the way that we look at recruiting students. We've been doing the same thing for years, right? And
Mhm.
so I think the AI, as much as it's going to be a challenge for institutions to take on, is also going to be an opportunity for them to really adapt and could give them the tools that they need to actually adapt. So I think, in the next 3 to 5 years, you'll see it. I think you'll see it making stylistic changes in the way that we do our work, right? It'll help us handle volume of applications in a different way. It'll help us handle volume of outreach in a different way. It'll help us try to highly personalize some things in a different way than we haven't been able to. But I think, more on the 5 year range, it may make some dramatic shifts in terms of the way, people really do business, right? Like the whole application process might change because so much of what students have been turning in the past that they've done can be done by AI. So
Yeah.
do you need to still collect it, right? Do you need to still look at it, right? So I could see it fundamentally changing some institutions in the way that they do business. And it
Mhm.
can also be advising on things that will make institutions change their model, right? It might say, look, you don't belong in this space anymore. Strategically, you should move into this space. And
Okay.
so I think in the 3 year range, it's going to help us do what we're doing now in a better way. But I think as you start to hit the 5 year range, it could potentially see us changing what we're doing, right? And
Transformation.
in the whole model.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be transformational. Yeah.
Understand. So, what is the biggest opportunity or biggest pain point, in your opinion, in the enrollment and financial aid? What do you think? Hey, this is something that is going to be disrupted completely.
Yeah, I mean, there are multiple big pain points going on right now, right? One that I see is, students are sort of like fleeing to the very highest level places, right? Because I think there's a lot of concern about the way that degrees now translate into job opportunities, right? So there's a lot of like outcomes concern. People are really, looking at that and like, okay, is the degree, does it directly translate into the outcome I'm looking for? And so because of that, students are chasing after those few institutions, right, with the biggest brand name, thinking that's where they're going to kind of be able to secure what that future for themselves, right? Which the data doesn't suggest that actually makes sense, right?
Mm.
That they have any better outcomes that way. The data actually looks and suggests the quality of the experience that you have at the institution is much more predictive of your job success than the selectivity of the institution that you go to, right? So I think that's a huge problem because 3/4 of the institutions in the U.S. are not those highly selective institutions, right? Maybe more, maybe it's even a higher percentage, right? 80%. So those institutions are right now they're really struggling to kind of rethink their model. There's always been this idea in the past, right? That I think we probably came out of the 60s or 70s, right? That you're every year you just recruit more students and you raise your tuition slightly, and that's the model for financial success. Well, what happens when you're in an environment where there aren't more students to recruit, right? There are less students, and those students are less willing to pay tuition increases, right? So now you've completely broken that financial model that 3/4 of our institutions are utilizing. So that's going to be in some ways the biggest pain point. And I think you're seeing that all over the place. You're seeing budget cuts, you're seeing tightening, you're seeing institutions unwilling to invest, even at the time when they need to be investing the most in their own future. They're not doing it because they're stuck in that old model. So I think if the AI, if the changes in the technology could help us get outside of that model, could help us think about revenue differently, right? This is like every single day at Mac Insight Group, every meeting we have, we talk about we want to be the ROI company for institutions, right? We want to help them see the direct ROI of the investment that we make. We're not satisfied if they're getting an ROI of 2 to 3 times. We want them to get like a 10x ROI. Those are our clients, right? So, and I think that's how institutions need to be thinking, right? They need to be thinking about this as how does the AI, how does the technology help us to rethink our revenue streams, right? So we worked with a client, right, and an institution in California. In 2 years, we helped them recoup $5.6 million in pre-collections, right? So before sending a student to collections because they haven't paid their bill, we reach out to them and talk to them and help give them options, and they pay part of their bill, right? $5.6 million, right? And that's something that people don't even think about. That's like throwaway, right? They're like, oh, we probably won't get anything out of that. And I think the AI will help us find those opportunities, right? Where it'll say, like, again, your boat is leaking, right? And here's where it is. Here's the problem. You just lost $6 million because you didn't help people pay their bills. Like, this is here, let me help you put together some information, some communication, let me help you target the people that are most likely to actually pay you back, right? Like, let's find those changes in revenue. And hopefully it'll tell you some other things. It'll say, go outside your normal market, do dual enrollment internationally because you're going to make this much money and there's a huge market and nobody else is playing in that market, right? So my hope is that the AI helps us think outside the box in terms of revenue, right? I think we've been stuck in this mentality that it's about more students, right? If you just get more students, the revenue will take care of itself. Well, in an environment where there aren't more students, or those students are really hard to get, you have to shift your mentality and say, this is about revenue. Yes, and the revenue helps us deliver on our mission for students, but we need to find those sources of revenue. And the more that the AI can point out those obvious problems, the
Yeah.
more it's going to help us transform.
Wow. Interesting. So, one last question: any advice for the future enrollment leaders, or something they should think this is what this industry is going to be? Anything like that?
I mean, I think I would say, as I talk to clients, I say, see it as an opportunity, right? It's easy to see it as threatening. It's easy to see, well, it's going to hurt jobs. It's going to, make the process less personalized for students. It's easy to see those downsides because we know them, right? We know what we do. But what it's harder to see is what we don't know is going to happen. But there's opportunity there, right? There is a way for you to, again, to use it as your companion and say, where am I missing, right? I want to use my gut instinct on some things. I want to use my training. I want to use my best people. I want to reinvest in relationships. But this is a way for you to, like, scan your environment really well and see where those issues are, and see where it's not about just trying harder. It's about trying differently. And I think the AI is going to be able to kind of advise us and become that bridge between us and our customers that makes that those transactions much more fluid and much more effective.
Interesting. Right, Aaron. Thanks for your time. I think we are pretty much close to our session. Thanks for your time, and I hope this session is useful for everyone. And I believe there is so many changes going in AI. We'll be connecting with you again for another round of discussion in 6 months. By that time, new tools would come and change even more how we are doing things now.
Absolutely. I think that's going to happen. So
Yeah.
thank you for having me.
Thank you. Have a great day. And thanks, everyone. Bye.